Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Diane Holdorf, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to WBCSD's event today on nature action and the work that we're doing together for a healthy and resilient future. I will be your host for part of our session today, and I'm the Managing Director of the Food and Nature Program at WBCSD. Peter White, our ambassador to COP15 and lead on biodiversity, will also be your co-host today and will help to close out our sessions. For those who may not be as familiar with WBCSD, we are working with member companies and partners around the world to ensure business leadership for a more sustainable future. Our mission and vision is really to ensure that of our leading businesses, of which we have over 200 companies working together with us, that we will create a world in which 9 billion people or more will be able to live well and within planetary boundaries by 2050. And of course, our topic today sits very much at the heart of how we can ensure that we are able to succeed in this together. The next slide shows an image of several of those 200 member companies to give you a sense of the types of leading organizations across all sectors who are working together with us and many other partners as we move forward on these key agendas. We're very pleased to have several of these members speaking with us along with incredibly important partners like the World Economic Forum today. Next slide. The way that we work, our theory of change, is to address these objectives across economic systems. We work on circular economy, we work on cities and mobility, climate and energy, people, and redefining value. And I come to you with the team from the Food and Nature Program. But what you'll recognize is that these are both economic systems and natural systems. So when we talk about shifting systems, we have to be working on the natural systems like climate and nature as well. And of course, these natural systems are very linked. So when we're working on these big natural systems like climate and energy, we're actually working as a cross-cutter across all of these economic systems as well. The event that you're participating with us in today is part of our virtual event series that we've been hosting for the past several months as all of us have moved into a new way of virtual working. I hope, let me take this moment to say that all of you, I hope, are keeping safe and healthy together with your loved ones in what have proven to be still very challenging times. And yet we adapt to the ways of working on Zoom, and we'll be talking a little bit about how we'll be handling our meeting here today. But for a full list of the remaining program, please visit our website for the virtual meetings to see what's coming up yet. A couple of things, and I'm sure everybody is very familiar with this by now, but the meeting is being recorded. And a big part of that is so that we can share this with all of those who have registered afterwards. So anyone who's been able to register for this event will be able to get a copy of the recorded event. We have muted your microphones to make the hearing much better, but if you do have a question, and we do want an active engaged session, please feel free to enter it into the chat. We'll be using the chat session predominantly today, but if you're not online and you don't feel comfortable using the chat and you want to raise your hand, you'll be then able to unmute and ask your question when we get to Q&A as well. So hopefully that's clear for everybody and certainly a familiar sign. Because we're companies working together with partners for transformational change, our work is pretty competitive. But yet we recognize that by having a lot of companies together, we also have to watch out for antitrust. So this is the antitrust statement reminder. We will not be covering any topics that touch on pricing, costs, business, key bid strategies, customers, output decisions, etc. If any of you feel that we're getting into uncomfortable territory, raise your hand. I will be watching for this, as will Peter as well. We do have several speakers today whose companies are in the closed and quiet period pre-earnings, so that will keep us at an even more cautious basis. So here's our agenda today. First, we're going to go into nature action, what it means for a healthy and resilient future, and the work that WBCSD together with members and partners is leading. As I referenced, big partner of ours who we work with so closely on this is the World Economic Forum. They've just issued their second in a series of their new nature economy reports. And by design, we have really linked our work so that the next steps that we pick up within the Nature Action Project in WBCSD carry forward the themes of the second new nature economy report. So we'll be looking forward to that conversation. We will then hear from our member companies, many of whom are leading in this space on the sectors that have been highlighted in that World Economic Forum report. And then we'll have a panel discussion moderated by Eva Zabe, who is the leader of Business for Nature, one of the most important platforms for all of us as we think about how we join up our policy and leadership statements in this very important space. So a very exciting agenda together today. You know, it was interesting. WBCSD launched Nature Action in March, just literally days after most of the globe started shutting down due to the COVID response. And all of us had come into 2020 really expecting this to be the super year for nature. And it has turned out to be very different than what we anticipated. But although the scenario completely changed, the urgency to halt nature loss and to protect and restore and regenerate nature has actually never been stronger. And what we're seeing is this correlation of nature loss and zoonotic disease transfer and human health implications from nature loss is bringing this point into incredibly sharp clarity, as well as not just for human health, but also for economic prosperity. So we see more clearly than ever that a natural world really directly affects our prosperity and our well-being, and that we as businesses and as humans have to invest in protecting nature to really start to mitigate these future risks, such as diseases, as well as natural disasters, so that our economies can thrive, our communities can thrive, and our families can survive. And we know that business plays a really leading role. We have to take action in these spaces. We have to ensure that we're rooted in science. And therefore, we're looking forward towards how do we support the setting of science-based targets for nature? How do we set the aspirational understanding and goals for a zero net apex target to assure that we halt nature loss starting now and become nature positive by 2030? And we're really starting to think about how we contribute to this business leadership agenda in a different way, particularly as we head into next year and years forward. This is really an opportunity for us to think about what will it take? How does business contribute? What is the sectoral guidance that we need? What are the science-based targets that will support that very important business agenda? How do we progress with critical and aligned KPIs to demonstrate that we are indeed together as a business community, both hitting the right objectives, sending the right messages, and helping bring others along with us as we take this journey. So these key elements of our Nature Action Project within WBCSD are really going to be focusing on the business role in achieving a positive economy, a nature positive economy. We're going to just shortly here deep dive into the World Economic Forum's report that I referenced already. It's fascinating, the work that has been done by the forum to point to the economic values. $44 trillion of economic value are either moderately or highly dependent on nature. So as we start to talk about what are the key sectors and what are the key transitions, this is going to really help us set into context how we get after not just value creation, but also at this important time, job creation as well. Very excited to hear from Akansha more on that. And then in future sessions, we'll be talking much more about how we start to work together more closely on science-based targets for nature and the work that we'll do together to make these critical contributions. Although this year has changed, not all has gone away. So we still have some events coming up yet this year. Primarily on the nature agenda will be the UN Biodiversity Summit, which has now been set for the 30th of September. So watch for more information to come on that. We know that IUCN, which should have happened last month, will now take place in the beginning of January, which will be a very key moment for continuing that agenda. And importantly, the work that we're doing is contributing towards how we set the right kinds of business leadership and input to support the courage of governments in setting a new agenda at the COP CBD 15, which will take place in Kunming the 17th through the 30th of May. And then we know that nature and climate are inherently linked, and we lead in nature many of the solutions from a natural climate solutions and nature-based solutions for climate agenda. So COP26, the climate COP, is going to be another really, really important moment for us as we bring this focus on nature-based solutions. There will be a number of other events that we'll be supporting throughout the year, but those are going to be the big moments in time to really watch for as we unify the business voice. And that we do together with many partners under the leadership of the umbrella platform of Business for Nature. And it's great having Eva with us and many of her team members as well to really, to continue to think through how do we together amplify our voice, further giving courage to policymakers on what the ambitions are and where business will contribute. In this case, we also showcase business solutions, and that is actually much of what will take us through our conversation today and tee us up even more strongly going forward as we think about how do we demonstrate what success can be and proof points are that will take us into bringing others forward on that level of high ambition. So this is an overview of the Nature Action Project, working on science-based targets for nature in support of the SBTN, bringing the collective business voice and input and preparedness to that, thinking about how business leads with solutions connected to both communities as well as climate and what's best for nature and what's best for business. And then working together with our partners through Business for Nature on what is the type of policy that we need. And then how do we bring forward into the events that we just spoke to, the business leadership that proves progress, but also defines what more we have yet to do. And with that, I'm very pleased to hand over to our next session.
Okay, thank you, Diane. This is Peter White here. Hope you can all hear me. My role is the Biodiversity Ambassador for WBCSD. And part of my work is to build engagement of business community and anticipation of the COP next year, the CBD COP on biological diversity. WBCSD, as Diane says, has been working on the ecosystems for a long time, over 20 years of experience. Many of the companies who are on the call today and many of the people on the call today have been involved in that work so far. I think over that period of time, what we've learned is that the nature and biodiversity has moved very much from what was originally seen as a CSR issue to being core to business, both in terms of risks and in terms of opportunities. And the other thing I think we've learned over that period is the fact that nature is inherently linked and has to be dealt with together with other issues, the link to climate, the link to food, the link to health, particularly recently, but particularly the link to prosperity and to jobs. And so it's great that we will be able to look now at the future of nature and business. The WEF New Nature Economy report that came out at the start of this year in Davos, nature risk rising, raised the sort of awareness, raised the risks of nature for business. And so this second report is really focusing on the area of the link to the economy, the link to prosperity, and particularly now to jobs, and very relevant now with the green recovery that's needed with post-COVID. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Akanksha Khatri. Akanksha leads the Nature Action Agenda at the World Economic Forum, is the lead author on the report. So welcome, Akanksha, and thank you for coming to share the key highlights of the latest New Nature Economy report. Akanksha, over to you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Peter, and the entire WBCSD team for inviting the forum to present the findings of the report. Just a little joke, we released actually the report only last week, so we had the press conference on Wednesday, and I got a lovely note of congratulations from Peter saying, oh, congratulations, but do not forget we also have a Monday event. So I'm very, very happy here before I start to put my feet up to share the findings here with all of you. Maybe with that, if we move to the second slide. Super. So I think Peter has in his introduction shared quite a bit about the New Nature Economy report series, so I would not take too much of the time, except that when we started the work on this series, the objective was really simple. How do we take the topic of nature and biodiversity loss beyond the green corridors, which is of course important, but really at the center of boardroom discussions? And to do that, it was identified, let's start speaking the language that businesses understand. And therefore, the three pieces which the report series is trying to address is risks, opportunities, and financing. The first report indeed was released in Davos this year with the big headline of more than half the world's GDP is moderately or highly dependent on nature loss. And this was the time where it did think that it's not just companies which have a connection with commodities who are dependent on it, but also tertiary sectors and secondary sectors like IT and banking who have a dependency and as well as impacts on nature loss. The second report, which we just launched last week, looks at what are the opportunities for businesses which go on a nature positive pathway. So for businesses who are highly dependent on nature loss and actually choose to be on the front foot of defining what could a nature positive transition pathway look like, there is $10 trillion of business opportunities awaiting, as well as 395 million jobs which can be created by 2030. The third report, which we are aiming to launch around November, is looking at financing for new nature economy. In the earlier slide, Diane was talking about the rhythm of certain events which are critical for all of us to work together on so that the issue does not go back again in the sidelines now that we are talking about COVID and post-COVID recovery, but really stays at the anchor of the post-COVID world that we want to create. Next slide, please. Another slide. Super. So this is, again, really just looking at the context. I think many of you who have joined us today would be familiar with the big report which was launched by IPBES last year. It also formed a great context for the G7 meeting hosted by France, is that nature is declining at a very unprecedented rate. Over 1 million species are at the risk of extinction, all due to human activity. So if that does not serve as a wake-up call, I think we really need to work on our hearing ability from nature. The second is, again, something that Diane was talking about, is nature loss, zoonotic diseases, and economic growth have become more at the forefront than ever before. 70% of emerging infectious diseases actually originate from wildlife. So of course, we know about Zika and COVID-19 and others, but even if you go all the way back to AIDS, it can be linked as a zoonotic disease. And lastly, when we are looking at a post-COVID recovery, I think countries as well as companies are thinking about their future for the next decade or so. Nature has to be at the anchor of it, because I don't think there is a single business out there which can say it is not dependent on nature, be it through the commodities, the resources, etc. But then also we are currently on Zoom on a computer, which relies, of course, on precious materials and resources which come from the rare earth. So this is just like a way of resetting as to why we need to rethink the way we have set up capitalism, as well as the way we have set up how our business and economic models operate. Next slide, please. So this is really goes back into starting. I think today we are at a very different world than when we started in the month of January working on this report. most businesses that we would have this conversation with were like, okay, fine, I care about nature, but I don't really know what to do about it. I don't know how it affects my business. So this is how we had identified the threats that are on biodiversity and how it connects to businesses. And this was done in a 3-level criteria. Is one, looking at what is the impact on biodiversity from direct business operations. The second is what is the role that businesses have in terms of driving them. And lastly, what is the disruption risk for businesses themselves? So again, in a simplistic, this methodology looks at both the impact as well as dependency. And those are frameworks I think businesses are a lot more comfortable with. And on the right side, while the font size is quite minute, you can see how it links to the activities that the businesses have, as well as plotted against the impact on threatened and near threatened species coming from the IUCN Red List. Next slide. And I think this is the more important one, is that if we look at the threat slides, which we talked about earlier, the top 3 systems which have the highest impact on nature loss are food, land, and ocean use, infrastructure and the built environment, and energy and extractives. And it gives me like great pleasure that today on the panel, we have representatives from each one of these 3 systems. Because if we have to move towards a nature positive pathway in the next decade, we need a business leadership supported by an ambitious policy action. So how do we come across these 3 systems and identify what are the priority transitions required in each one of these 3 systems? Next slide, please. So I think over the next few slides, I'd like to take you through the 3 systems and what are the transitions that are prioritized or identified if we have to move to a nature positive pathway by 2030. And in the first one, which is food, land, and ocean use, we have identified that there is a $3.6 trillion prize which exists in business opportunities, as well as the creation of 190 million jobs, if we were able to collectively prioritize these transitions. And these include ecosystem restoration. Maybe if we go to the next slide, it might be easier. These are the 6 transitions which look at the structure of nature sparing and nature sharing. I think for very long, we have learned to extract from nature and then move on, assuming that it is an unlimited resource. I think for the first time, we are realizing that the human activity is just really crossing the planetary boundaries, and we need to shift away from business as usual, which starts looking at nature also as a limited commodity or a limited capital, just the way we do with financial or physical man-made capital, human-made capital. So the 6 transitions that we have identified over here, the 5 are really co-transition, and the last one is more what we call a enabling transition. First is looking at really ecosystem restoration and avoiding land use expansion. And this goes both in the land as well as the marine resources. A lot of you have been in your respective businesses engaged in tree planting or restoration agenda. The question is not just to simply think of how do we plant trees, but also how do we maintain them with equal engagement from local communities. The second one, which is really gaining steam, is on productive and regenerative agriculture. There is significant work which is being done by the coalition of One Planet Business for Biodiversity, many of which have members who will, I imagine, on this call as well. How do we take the concept of regenerative agriculture, but instead of creating that burden on farmers, find a way that we incentivize farmers and businesses equally to shift practices in the coming years to regenerative, so that it is good for the planet, the soil, as well as for our profits. The other one is on healthy and productive ocean. I think it is a fact pretty well known that over 80 or 90% of fisheries today are unsustainably sourced. So moving away actually to a nature positive fishery or aquaculture ensures that we have a future which is more sustainable instead of actually running away from the only resource that we have. And then the other one that I would like to call out is on sustainable forest management, which is also combining more around the regenerative when we talk about agroforestry, but also ensuring that companies who have committed to deforestation-free supply chains through multiple coalitions and initiatives are able to keep up their ambition high. It's interesting to see how almost like the 500 or top Fortune 500 companies, less than 300 of them have actually made commitments to deforestation-free supply chains. And even the ones who have made those commitments, they are nowhere near to meeting them. So there is a real need for a public-private ambition in this space and identifying that what is missing and how do we get to the goal that we have set out for ourselves. The other one is looking at planet-compatible diets, which I think some of you who also work with the FRESH initiative have been engaging with WBCSD or the Future of Alternative Protein of the Forum. And the last one is on transparent and sustainable supply chains. I think none of these transitions would happen if we do not have clarity, or the businesses do not have clarity in terms of where they are sourcing from and really what is the last mile impact on of their supply chains on nature. So it is as much about collecting information, acknowledging the loss that businesses have, and then taking action together. So maybe with that, I'd like to move to the second system, which is maybe to the next slide, which is really looking, so I think the previous one is just to show you what are the prize that exists if we move towards a nature positive infrastructure in the built environment. But then what would those transitions look like if we move to the next slide? I think, again, just going back to the concept of nature sparing and nature sharing, we have been squeezing the space for wildlife increasingly and really looking at an urban sprawl, which means that wildlife does not have as much of a space. And that is also one of the reasons for the rise in zoonotic diseases, because more and more wildlife and humans are living in close contact with each other, which means that the spill-off of any diseases from animals to humans goes up. If we were to look at a more compact built environment, which allows for sparing nature for wildlife, as well as makes it more efficient in terms of our own resources, that could be a way to go forward. Just as an example, our research indicates that if you look at land through either office spaces or land through parking lots, which actually lies vacant and underutilized during the working week, is almost equal to the size of Switzerland. So we are talking about 44 billion square meters of area. So we have to really think about how do we build our cities, given that from now till until 2030, there will be more than 1 million people joining urban spaces every week. So we really have to think about how do we urbanize. The second one is looking at just how do we look at urban utilities. Today, 80% of the human discharge is actually just sent into water, which we then use to irrigate our cropland. So there is no way or at least there aren't enough infrastructure today to be treating the human as well as the commercial discharge and go before it actually goes into our waterways. So we really have to think about, are we looking at the way we live our lives in our urban as well as rural environments in the most planet-compatible way. The other one is also looking at nature as infrastructure. There's been a huge amount of work that is now suddenly picking up on green infrastructure and green and gray infrastructure, starting to look at nature in terms of its ability to also give us coastal safeguards. I'm from Delhi, and yesterday I was talking to my parents. We just had less than an hour of rainfall yesterday, and it's monsoon season, so it should be expected. And a bridge completely collapsed. This is like the capital of the country. We're just not thinking about how we are looking at nature and its ability to absorb rainwater, but we've urbanized in such a way that we have threatened the nature's ability to take care against the threats of nature, as well as we haven't built up the human capacity to fight the nature's threats. So I think there's something terribly wrong in the way that we are urbanizing as well as building our infrastructure. And the last piece that I'd like to mention is also about connecting the infrastructure across, say, the topics of nature-based solutions, natural climate solutions, which is, again, a piece of work which sits very closely between the work that we are doing between the World Economic Forum and WBCSD. Maybe on the next slide. So again, these are just a few transitions which are looking at extractives and energy. I know that we will be sharing these slide deck with you. So maybe if we move quickly to the next one. And instead of going through all of them, I think one that I'd love to call out on is really looking at the circular economic model. Is that how do we move away from the thinking of extracting from nature, but really looking at nature as a resource which can be recycled from end to end. And the last one is on the energy transition. I think this is where we are able to connect between the climate agenda and the nature agenda. Climate change is responsible for about 11 to 16% of nature or biodiversity loss. So while working on climate change is really important, we also have to look at it in a way that is nature positive. Maybe on the next slide then. One more. So what is it that businesses can actually do now that you know what are the transitions which are needed? I think the first thing is businesses need to move away from thinking this is a green agenda which does not affect my business, but really identifying which are the transitions that they can truly play a role in. The second thing is exploring potential collaboration opportunities and thinking about the tipping points. I think we often talk about the 80-20 rule, is businesses who can create an agenda at the first 20% and really staying at the frontier can set the agenda for the remaining 80% of their business partners. But nobody can do this by themselves. And there is a specific reason why we are looking at socioeconomic systems and not industry sectors, because the typical industry sectors will not help you find a solution. We really need to be able to go beyond the boundaries that are needed. And the last piece is really looking at a mix of enablers that looks at financial capital investment as well as technology investment. We've seen how technology has impacted different parts of our life. Why can we not up the level of technological investment to make sure that we are moving to a nature positive pathway? The next slide, please. So when looking at the investment, our research shows that you need something around the tune of $2.7 trillion to be able to realize the 10.1 trillion of business opportunities. And of course, it's a huge amount of money, but it definitely pales in comparison when you think about the stimulus packages, recovery packages that are being announced by multiple governments. If I look at just the US alone, it's 2.2 trillion in the month of March of 2020. So I think COVID-19 has shown us that we are capable of drastic change. It's more about the will and the ambition that we bring to the table. Next slide. So these are just some of the key messages that I'd like to leave us with, is that one, there is no business as usual future. It just is not, it's not viable anymore. So we have no choice but to move. 80% of the threatened and near threatened species are affected by these three socioeconomic systems, which we'll hear more from the rest of the panel today. A fundamental transformation is needed across all of them. And lastly, we are capable of taking pragmatic actions if we only have the right policy reforms. And along with the main report of Future of Nature and Business, if we go to the next slide, we also released a policy companion piece in complement to the one which was released by Business for Nature earlier in the year in January at Davos 2020. Maybe next one. Next slide, please. Which really looks at how do we prioritize and influence through our respective networks, governments and policymakers, so that their recovery packages can prioritize nature and not put it at the back burner. And we can do that through a few clear, specific actions. Is one, we have to protect and restore natural capital assets. There's no way about it. How we do it can be done through whether we choose to measure the right things. How do we go beyond just measuring GDP or gross value added from the business side? The second is how do we enhance resource productivity? So really move into the circular economy models. And third is how do we scale regenerative value chains? So both in terms of deforestation-free value chains, but also looking at regenerative agriculture and mariculture. So with that, maybe I'll stop my presentation. I think I took a significant amount of time, but I hope this was helpful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Akanksha, and a significant amount of time, but a very significant report. So congratulations on the report, and thank you for that. The top lines you've heard, 10.1 trillion in economic opportunity, 395 million jobs by 2030. So, you know, at the macro level, it's a huge opportunity. What does business need to do? I heard it needs to understand what's relevant. It needs to explore collaborations and work out the mix of enablers. And that's, we want to explore some of those, the work that's going on already and some of those collaborations now. What we would like to do is to take the three economic systems that Akanksha mentioned, food, land and ocean use, infrastructure, and the built environment, and energy and extractives, and look at some of the business leadership that is going on in those areas already. And so we have 4 short presentations for you on those different systems and what is already happening. We will have the sort of short 5-minute presentations. If you have any questions on these next presentations, please put them in the chat, because at the end we will be able to have a panel, and we can ask those questions of the speakers. So if we can, next slide. So thank you very much, Akanksha. Akanksha will be joining the panel too, so you can ask her any questions you want at that point. First up is Guillermo Cavall, who is the head of Sustainable and Responsible Business in Latin America for Syngenta, and he's going to talk a little about what's happening in his business in the food, land and ocean use systems. So over to you, Guillermo.
Hi everyone, good morning here. As Peter mentioned, I work for Syngenta. I'm based here in Sao Paulo, and for us, maybe just to move directly into the presentation on the next slide, I would like to start maybe just with a quick reflection from our side. I think that inside Syngenta during the last decades, we've been kind of looking at the grower level, at the field level, and just looking all what had to do with pest and disease, what really affect him in the field. And part of the learnings we've had so far, and part of the journey that we started some years ago, is that what we were looking was part of a wider, for sure, of a wider context that the grower needed to attend. That's why we started on the next slide, please. We started on 2013 a journey called the Good Growth Plan, which is like our sustainability platform to actually to start learning about what should be focusing on and what should be learning to accompany this grower, to help him to achieve and to be successful on that land that he has available to produce food for everyone. So we started making this journey focusing on 3 major pillars. After almost 7 years of work done in different countries in the world, we've learned so much, and we've seen that topics that we were driving from just productivity, looking on the soil and biodiversity fields, and trying to maintain him as safe as possible during his duties at farm. We're just a part of the challenge that he was facing during his daily activities. Now on a recent survey we made, almost 59-60% of the growers that we talked with on more than 5 big agricultural countries in the world, we saw that almost 60% of them, they mentioned that climate change nowadays is the most challenging topic that they are facing right now. So this is no more a technology topic. This is no more a productivity topic. It needs an integral view to attend these challenges that they are facing. That's why recently, actually in June, we launched the second phase of our program, in which we are focusing on how we are going to support these farmers, our natural clients, to support them through technology. How are we going to bring up on a faster mood technology to drive these challenges? How are we going to strive for a carbon neutral agriculture? This has to do with our operations. This has to do with, as Akash mentioned in her presentation, as systems that needs to be put in place in the agricultural system to make things different with a lower or neutral environmental impact, accompanying these growers to stay safe, to be able to do what they know to do on a healthy way. And something that for us, it's a key learning from the first phase, is that we don't have all the answer for all these challenges. We need to partner, we need to work together with other entities to really take these learnings and to wider the impacts that we could create as a single company. But we know that as being part of a food chain, as being part of a wider environment, we need to not only take advantage of all those learnings, but also bring them all together and put them in service of the farmers that at the end are the ones who are going to need this to develop what they do on a better way. On the next slide, I would just like to share with you just an example that Syngenta has been developing. Actually, this year is the 25th anniversary of this initiative. It's called EcoAguas. This is a project that is based in Colombia, and it's a project that we started. Next slide, please. It's a project that is focused on recovering water basins that are strategic for agricultural zones. And what we did was just the key aspect of this project was to shift from a philanthropic view of just giving some money for an entity to develop a reforestation process, and how could we do it with those communities that are part of the agricultural areas, and how could we integrate this as part of our commercial offer as well. So what we're doing is that, and this is, I believe, just an example of the challenges we have to drive many of these solutions just as a social responsibility initiative, to really integrate this as part of the DNA of our company, as part of the DNA of our business as usual models, to really put them in place and to be affordable, not only for a company like us, but also for other competitors to help and support and to contribute to change the models that we're doing. This project is basically driven by more than 490 people from rural areas that are normally they have very low income or non-income in these areas. Many of them are the wives of rural workers, and 70% of them they are women who are earning an additional income for these families, who are being able to contribute not only on an environmental way in which they are producing the trees in their homes, they're planting them, they are conserving them, but also they are generating a very important income to supply economic needs that they have at this moment. We have been able during these 25 years to impact more than to plant more than 1.5 million trees, where we have on the next slide please, where we have a very nice, I would say a very nice survival rate of these trees, and we've been able to add some partners during this process, and to learn that, for example, technology plays a key role to monitor and to assure that all of these processes that we're doing, they bring up not only a positive environmental impact, but also they have other type of benefits for the companies and for the customers that we work with. And we've been able to adapt this technology to present it as part of a contribution to a wider scope with the Colombian government. And now we are all together pushing forward to make this environmental movement inside Colombia to be part of a national movement. So something that started just 25 years ago inside Syngenta as a CSR program or philanthropic program, now it makes part of our business model as well, and it makes part as well as of a national environmental movement in Colombia.
Thank you, Guillermo.
That's from my side.
Congratulations on your awards, and great to hear that the move from CSR to core business. That very clear message. So thank you very much for that, and there'll be a chance to talk more in the panel session. So thank you, Guillermo. Perhaps we now move to the infrastructure and built environment system, and very pleased to welcome Ben Smith. Ben Smith from Arup, where he is Director for Energy and Climate Change Consulting. So Ben, if you'd like to take us briefly through what you're up to in the infrastructure and built environment.
Yes, of course, Peter. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. If you don't know already, then Arup is at our core, we're a large global engineering practice, but we also employ architects and designers and planners and ecologists and so on. So I'm offering that sort of integrated built environment consultancy service. I sit as a director within the integrated city planning team. As Peter said, I focus actually on energy and climate change, but have a real passion for nature-based solutions. So if you roll forward a few slides, I think there's another cover slide in here as well. Yeah, so one more. Thank you. Oh, back one. Fantastic. So I just thought I'd explain a little bit about what we're doing at a company level around sustainable development and how nature comes in through that process. So last year in May, we launched a new global sustainability strategy called A Better Way. Later that year, we followed with an implementation guide to give all of our teams around the world a good steer about how they should be responding to the strategy and in their actual day-to-day work and activities. We are taking the approach that we're trying to realign our business towards the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, and the 169 targets as well. And whilst we've gone through a quite extensive exercise to consider how we go about that in the best way and which of those goals and targets are most material to our business, and whilst we've decided we're not able to discount any of them, we have tried to give a little bit more focus to a few areas, and the pillar on the right hand side of this slide just shows some of the 6 areas that we're really kind of focusing on for this first round of activity linked to our strategy. So it's human health and well-being, zero carbon, circular economy principles, community resilience, social value, and planetary boundaries. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I was thinking about those blocks, and I think that nature is inherently running through all of them. So I would say that nature and biodiversity is very material in terms of the work that we're taking forward as part of our strategy. We know that, for example, you're getting outside a bit more is good for physical and mental health. And we know that in terms of zero carbon, biological sequestration is becoming an increasingly big part of the conversation. So if you just roll forward one more slide there. Brilliant. So at Arup, we have a lot of partnerships, some of which are long-standing, and you may have heard about our partnership that we've had for 10 years now with C40 cities. We've also worked with what was 100 resilient cities to develop, well, we've worked on 23 city resilience urban resilience strategies in 23 cities, of which I led many of them, including the ones in Rotterdam, Paris, and Melbourne. And what I would just reflect is that irrespective of whether you're helping a city to prepare an urban resilience plan or a climate adaptation plan, nature-based solutions will be coming to the table as part of the response to those shocks and stresses. So in Rotterdam, you have proposals to generate 10 kilometers squared of green roofs on the rooftops in the city. And in that case, it's very much led by the ability of those green roofs to attenuate rainwater for obvious reasons. In Rotterdam, sitting below sea level, attenuating rainfall is a big focus. In Paris, you have a really interesting project called the Oasis Schoolyard, where they're looking to turn lots of concrete schoolyards into green oases. And in that case, very much responding to the idea that those areas get very hot, and increasingly they will get hotter, and those green spaces provide an area of cooling where people can congregate, and they also help with and support community cohesion. And in Melbourne, you have the urban forest, and I could go on and on. In Tirana, we have the orbital forest, which is now looking as being planned. And I wanted to mention as well, I talk about my sort of passion for this area outside of work. I'm a trustee for the National Park City Foundation, which is something that WEF have really helpfully profiled in the last couple of years. And so we're seeing in cities where we work all around the world, nature coming to the forefront to respond to some of these urban resilience and climate change challenges. And I'll carry on that theme by just going on the next slide, if that's okay. Because whilst I think city governments are developing strategies which outline the sort of direction of travel that we need to be taking, it often falls to business to make those visions and those aspirations become a reality. And this is a project I'm just going to talk briefly about. It started as Arup developing an ecology master plan for the Crown Estate, which is a collection of, well, it's a landholder in London with some very significant estate in the West End of London, which is the, you know, the theatre district, which many of you, I'm sure, will know and have been visited. And what that was looking at opportunities to integrate green or more greening projects into some of those meanwhile spaces that Akansha talked about and described when she was referring to her report. What it developed into, which I think is really exciting, is a number of other landholders in and around the Crown Estates portfolio of buildings saying, well, actually, this is amazing. You're creating a better environment. It's a better retail experience. People are congregating more. It's more social. People are eating on the streets. And so we basically want to join in. And so all the estates around the Crown Estate, so Grosvenor Estate, the Portman Estate, Shaftesbury Estate, Howard de Warden, and so on, which own a lot of the West End, all basically came into this partnership to grow this master plan from one estate over 5 or 6 estates. The project is supported by the Greater London Authority and by the London Wildlife Trust, and Arup works as the project manager, program manager, and also the technical partner sort of monitoring and evaluating the success of the integration of nature and biodiversity into this, which is very much you know, dense urban environment. So I think I probably reached my 5 minutes. I shall stop there. But just to say, yes, I mean, I think it's really interesting how city governments are setting a vision. And I think there's huge opportunities for business to then grasp onto those visions and start thinking about how they help to deliver some of those visions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben, and thanks for being so concise and to the point. So, and also the strong emphasis there on nature-based solutions, which I think WBCSD is actively working on, and we'll talk a little about later. That takes us on to the third of the big systems in the WEF report, and that's energy and extractives. And we're very grateful to have 2 speakers on energy and extractives. The first is Karen Wesley. So welcome, Karen, who's Vice President of Group Environment at Shell. we're really grateful to have both Karen and Paul, the following speaker, because this is the closed period for reporting, and so obviously they're very busy. Karen has said she's very happy to speak, but because of the company reporting, she won't be able to join the panel. But if you have any questions for Karen, please put them in the chat, and we will endeavour to get them answered after the reporting period. So, Karen, thank you so much for giving up your time at this busy period, and over to you. Talk about energy and extractives work at Shell. Karen, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, can you hear me, Peter?
We can hear you and see you perfectly. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction, Peter, and thanks to the audience to send any questions in writing that I can then answer when the close period is finished. I think the slides are being controlled by Maria, so I'll ask you to take us to the next slide. And the next one, yes, I'm Karen. Nice to meet you. I know some of you, but not all of you. This is just a cautionary note. We discussed the issue around antitrust at the beginning of the call, so I won't belabor that point now. And I will get to the first major topic, which is what is the business case for Shell to be involved in nature-based solutions. And that is really very much a part of our net zero emissions energy business aspiration by 2050 or sooner. So there are really three key reasons why nature-based solutions has a role to play there. The first one is it does contribute to our climate ambition. The second one is that nature-based solutions are one option which help address our customers' emissions footprint when they use energy products bought from Shell. And they're also a competitive investment in carbon sequestration at a time when the world is more and more carbon constrained. So for that reason, nature-based solutions are a key part of our strategy in Shell to reduce the carbon footprint of the products that we sell. The next slide talks a little bit about the role of nature-based solutions in a broader strategy around decarbonization. And I'll ask Maria, yes, thank you. The point of this slide is I think it addresses one of the biggest challenges around nature-based solutions, which is the concern that it could be a greenwash or used as a way to avoid other forms of decarbonization. And what I wanted to emphasize here is that nature-based solutions are only effective in strategy if they are in addition to and not instead of other robust decarbonization efforts. And what that really means is that although tactics and solutions differ company by company, there's really a common theme, which is that no company can afford to back one horse when it comes to mitigating the effects of climate change. So we really need guaranteed winners, which means we need to back all the horses. And you'll see on this slide a range of different tactics that are being used across Shell and indeed across the energy industry to avoid emissions, to reduce emissions, and as a final resort to compensate emissions. So every industry is reacting to this in a slightly different way, but for airlines, for example, this could include investing in sustainable fuels and finding greater efficiencies. And for energy companies like Shell, it's about focusing on where and how emissions can be avoided in the first place. It means reducing emissions through technology and making our operations more carbon efficient, which is a key part of our net carbon footprint target. But it also means investing more in low carbon fuels, such as biofuels and hydrogen, providing renewable power from solar and wind, and increasing the number of charging points for battery electric cars, and much more besides. Within NBS, it's really about ensuring robust standards are used, and I'll get into that in a moment. So going into the details then of the NBS approach, which is summarized in the next slide, it's really a program with 3 pillars. And the very first pillar is our investments in natural ecosystems, and that's part of the strategy to act on global climate change. We heard a lot about that from the World Economic Forum, so I won't go into this slide in too much detail, but essentially, nature has the potential to provide more than 1/3 of the climate solution by 2030. Yet just 2% of the funding for climate action goes towards forest and land protection. And we saw in the WF presentation what a significant contribution forest and land protection has to play. The next slide then speaks about specifically Shell's approach, the first pillar of which is to invest directly in natural ecosystems. So this is on the supply side then. So as a start, in the Netherlands, we're planting more than 5 million trees in partnership over the next 12 years. This is with the Dutch State Forestry Service. In Spain, we're doing a pilot project reforesting 300 hectares of degraded land with the Landlife Company. And in the UK, we're also in partnership to generate carbon credits by helping to plant or regenerate about 1 million trees over the next 5 years. In Australia, closer to my region, we're restoring 1,000 hectares of endangered wooded grasslands. So these projects aren't going to necessarily generate carbon credits now, but we do expect them to do within the next 5 years. So we're investing now to prepare more customer demand as the world's carbon budget gets smaller. So that takes us to our second pillar, which is around marketing and trading. We're acutely aware that there is a growing interest for nature-based carbon credits, and that interest supply stimulates demand here and now, as well as into the future. And Shell's fairly well positioned to meet this demand as one of the world's most established climate carbon traders in the world. Our final pillar here is demand. Maybe we could start with this one actually, but over the past 2 years, we've spoken to more than 4,000 customers and to hear what's on their mind and considered how to best tackle their carbon footprint. And based on that, we've offered carbon neutral driving. That's one of those types of offers. And we've started to offer these customer nature-based carbon credits to offset carbon dioxide emissions of vehicles. And that's available in the Netherlands and the UK. Later this year, we'll also offer it to Germany, Austria, and Switzerland for those of you in the WBCSD may be interested. So those are some of the solutions we're focused on, but let's talk a little bit more, since this is such a key forum, on what are the barriers or what are the things that we would need to do for the world to take these aspects to scale. And that's really where the partnerships kick in. So getting to net zero is going to require unprecedented collaboration and coordinated action across all these systems that have been discussed, first in Diana's opening and then with WEF. And that's why companies from different sectors, as well as NGOs and multilateral institutions, have to work together. So Shell are part of the Natural Climate Solutions Alliance, led by the World Economic Forum. And we're also focused on achieving alignment on responsible uses of nature-based credits, which is key to the whole issue around credibility. Carbon markets, are they viable? That's another big question that comes up for us. And there are the two, the compliance markets and the voluntary markets, as many of you know. And although the voluntary markets are smaller in size, there are about 80 countries now which are using those. So the growing interest for nature-based carbon credits is stimulating demand, but what's standing in way of growth? First is the need for governments to agree on how best to track and trade emissions reductions. This is all around Article 6, and resolving some of these questions would help further encourage private investment. There's been good progress on pilots in countries, so either countries or companies within them providing investment to mitigate projects in other countries. And that's also hopefully going to be a growing trend. But the key barrier for many of us is still around legitimacy, and that means that they're really only credible use of nature-based solutions is in addition to other forms of decarbonization in the global economy. So we're tackling each of these challenges in turn. And for example, our internal screening processes, making sure we only trade under certified and credible high quality schemes, and also ensuring that the projects themselves that I referred to in the supply side maintain appropriate health, safety, security, and social governance standards. But just in terms of wrapping up, I don't want to make it sound like these barriers are insurmountable. They certainly are not, in collaboration and good partnerships with others. So there's a growing sense of excitement around the NBS sector across companies and different sectors, governments, and with NGOs and multilateral organizations. So really, the stage is there for nature-based carbon credits to play an increasingly significant role to years to come. We certainly intend to be a part of it, and I hope that all of you intend to be there with us too. Thanks so much, Peter.
Karen, thank you so much. And collaboration and overcoming the barriers to actually make this happen is what I took from that. So congratulations on your program. Thank you so much for that whirlwind tour through all the things that you are doing, and for keeping to near enough time, and that allows us to move on. So thank you, Karen. And moving on to Paul Jeffress, who is head of group policy at BP. Paul, ahead of we have a panel discussion coming up to quiz you, but ahead of that, please give us a brief overview of what BP is working on in this area. Paul, I can see you, but it says that you are muted. Can someone unmute Paul? Paul?
Am I
Okay,
unmuted
you can
now?
speak now. That's it? Perfect.
Okay, I can't see my slides on the screen. Are they there?
Maria is just sharing the slides now. They're up now.
Great, thanks very much. So I was, well, I can see right off the bat that I'm apparently a month behind already. So I think, like everyone else under lockdown, we're sort of struggling to keep up. So I've fallen a month behind. I had June the 20th on my date there. So I was going to talk about three things. One is just to let those who haven't sort of followed the news in recent months know about the company's new purpose and ambition, which is directly relevant to the discussion of the value of nature, specifically about our position on biodiversity, and finally touch on some of the issues that Karen has just talked about around natural climate solutions in particular as being a potentially significant component of that. So next slide. So I'll start by describing what our new purpose and ambition are. In February of this year, just before the virus struck, the company made some quite substantial changes, both to its sort of general purpose and ambition and to its structure. So we set a company purpose, which is literally transformational. It is to reimagine energy for people and for the planet. Within that, we have a specific ambition, which is to become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, and to help the world get to net zero. At the very heart of that is the idea of sustainability. This is reimagining energy for people and the planet, which I think is what sustainability is about. And as evidence of the sincerity of that commitment, I think, we rearranged the company in part to create a new executive vice president role, which is head of EVP for strategy and sustainability. So in other words, those two roles, strategy making and setting the sustainability framework for delivering the strategy sustainably, are now located in a single person managing both parts of that challenge. Beyond that, we have already developed a biodiversity position, which I will come on to talk about in a moment, and also a new human rights policy, both of which we're very proud of, both of which we believe to be sector leading. Those are part of the development of a wider sustainability framework, which we will talk more about in September when we provide some more detail around how we intend to begin to deliver our ambition. The reason I've referred to COVID in reference to our purpose and ambition is threefold. One is that given that we made our announcements in February just before COVID became a sort of a global issue, was that many people immediately said, well, does the arrival of COVID affect your purpose and ambition? Will you slow down? Will you abandon it? And, you know, the answer was actually a resounding no. You know, not only will it not affect or slow down the purpose or ambition, but it will actually amplify and accelerate it. And I think that is because COVID has shown everyone the interconnectedness of things. You know, that many systems are interconnected and vulnerable, and that we need, if anything, to build resilience and interconnected resilience more than we have in the past. And finally, I think COVID does genuinely offer a chance to build back better. And, you know, we can talk about that later perhaps, but I think that is a real opportunity as well as obviously a terrible challenge. So next slide. So as I said, we've developed a new biodiversity position. We see it as absolutely integral and central to sustainable development more broadly, and therefore to our purpose and ambition. Because, as Karen has pointed out, biodiversity, or at least wild nature and natural habitats, are literally, we believe, essential for the delivery of Paris goals through both changes to the negative impacts on the climate of current land use patterns and potentially modifying land use patterns so that going forward they are positive, both with respect to greenhouse gas emissions absorption, but also to biodiversity conservation and habitat conservation. So moving to the next slide, I'll explain in some detail specifically what we are proposing to do in respect of our biodiversity position. So the first point, and perhaps the most striking, I don't know, I'll leave that to listeners to judge, but we are committing, and it's rare that a company makes a commitment. Usually their ambitions and aspirations and so on and aims, but in this case we have made a commitment not to operate any new oil and gas exploration or production within officially inscribed UNESCO World Heritage Sites, both cultural and natural. So other companies have made similar commitments. This is the commitment that we have now made, and we've extended that to include, in addition, within the boundaries either of strict nature reserves defined by IUCN under category 1A, or wilderness areas, again defined by IUCN, this time as category 1B, as they were listed on January the 1st, 2020. So that is a specific thing, it's very bounded, quite literally. So that's one component. A second is that we will aim to achieve a net positive impact on biodiversity in our new projects, and that will be from 2022. We're now in the process of developing sort of plans and methodologies and metrics to understand how we can deliver that and measure that. And that's for our new projects. With respect to our existing major operating sites, we have a similar aim that we will necessarily approach slightly differently because those operations already exist, to enhance biodiversity around our major operating sites. And then finally, within countries where we have major investments and significant interests, we will support biodiversity restoration and generally sustainable use of natural resources, by looking for opportunities within those countries to restore biodiversity. So hopefully those will be seen as significant aims, ambitions and commitments, but we definitely feel they are. We are proud of them and looking forward to delivering. So if we move on.
Thank you, Paul. And congratulations on the new position. I'm sure there may be some questions from folks around that going forward. So thank you for the presentation. Moving on, I'd like to now introduce Eva. Eva Zabe, many of you will already know, a long time work in the whole area of ecosystems at WBCSD, and has now stepped up to be the Executive Director of Business for Nature. Eva is going to moderate the panel. On the panel we have Akanksha, Guillermo, Ben and Paul. So Paul also mentioned that because he is in the closed season, there may be some, if there are any questions of a financial nature, he will have to decline, but he's happy to answer any other questions around the new biodiversity position. So Eva, over to you, and time to ask the questions of the speakers.
Great, thanks so much, Peter, and thanks so much, all of you. It is an absolute pleasure to be here and see so many of you that I know from when I was at WBCSD for 15 years before moving on to lead Business for Nature now. So we've heard from some of the speakers. We have about 10 minutes for a bit of a powwow panel. And just there were a lot of these, questions that have been coming up and the points that are being made. I have to say, we have been talking about this. We've been aware within the business community to some extent for some of these issues, but they've suddenly become much more visible at an international level, which is great that nature is moving up the agenda. But just to frame things, I had a quick poll in your mind. We're not doing a real poll, so don't worry about the technicalities, but just, I want you to visualize in WBCSD and IUCN released a guide called Business and Biodiversity, a guide for the private sector. In your heads, can you think about the year that was released? You got it? Okay, well, just so you know, it was 1997, all right? So for decades, we've been working on biodiversity ecosystem services. Then, we've gone on to how do you value nature through natural capital? How do you include it in risk management and performance management? We've talked about, nature-based solutions, and just in 3 days' time, the IUCN will be releasing the new global standard for how to do that, which is not just about capturing carbon emissions, but also making sure that it's good for people and biodiversity as well. So what does this all tell us? That timing is everything, right? And here today, we're just celebrating the launch of a second significant report by the World Economic Forum. Not only the content is excellent and will be used as material, but just it is the World Economic Forum that has launched this report, and that is a signal to us. It is a symbolic move that we are now entering the mainstream. So we need the leadership and the momentum from business, and that's what all of us together are working on. So how can we now scale and speed up? On the scale, Guillermo, I wanted to come to you first. It was really, really interesting to hear about the work you're doing and that farmers are calling for more action on climate. They want to be carbon neutral as part of the Good Growth Plan. But, do they also want to work on biodiversity and nature loss? It was great to hear about the example of Ecoaguas in Colombia. How can that be scaled up? Is Syngenta talking about scaling up those interconnected efforts across the world? Thank you, Guillermo.
Thanks, Eva. Yes, the quick answer is yes. We are willing to scale up. We are looking for different models. Actually, just to highlight, here in Brazil, we are working on a project called Reverte, which we are looking or aiming to recover not only degraded pasture lands and bring them up to agriculture as a way to avoid that this expansion on agriculture could go in other directions that we all know. We really want to focus on areas that are available for agriculture, and through different rotation systems that they are already invented jointly with practices that we already did, like Ecoaguas in other countries, like here in Brazil. Putting all of these kind of intelligence and models together, we are sure that we can do a more sustainable agriculture jointly with our clients in different parts of the world.
All right, thanks so much, Guillermo. And, talking about rotations and everything, Ben, I'm going to come to you. I don't know, I can't help thinking that, as we've said, so many of the solutions are aware, we're already made aware of them in the excellent WEF report. We hear about energy efficiency in buildings, circular economy in textiles, natural infrastructure in cities, natural climate and natural nature-based solutions. Ben, is this really a matter of repackaging to make a hugely compelling case? Are there things that, are hidden gems that maybe we haven't been paying enough attention to? What do you feel about it? You've been in this space, for a while, and do you think that there's, what's your latest, pitch to get companies really engaged, and also the policymakers to then, create that incentive for more action?
Yeah, thanks, Eva. Yeah, I mean, of course, you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of this stuff we have been talking about for many years, and certainly when you look at the built environment and cities, there is the things that you're able to do through design, and much of it was picked up in the WEF report around, transit-orientated development, low energy, zero carbon development, integrated nature, green space, and so on. So that has been front of mind for many years. But I think for me, the thing that's happened in the last year or two, which is, I think, has potential to be a bit of a game changer, is the partnerships and a recognition of organizations in the city of their supply chain impacts, and the recognition that doesn't need to be this disconnect between the city and urban environment and the rural land use. So I think the sort of pillars 1 and 2 in the WEF report increasingly are going to have to start coming together. You look at a company like Arup, we've committed to a zero carbon target by 2030. We know we can't do that through action we take alone on our own portfolio. We have to partner with someone who is able to help us to deliver some biological sequestration. And when we do that, we obviously want to do it not just from a carbon point of view, but to make sure that as you say before, the biodiversity and the people part is, but that's not something it's easy for us to do. We don't have a huge amount of land holding. And we're talking to lots of similar companies who perhaps have big footprints in big cities, but don't have any land availability. And so they don't know how they're going to necessarily get into that space. But that whole kind of coming together between the emitters and the demand centers in the cities and the landholders and the experience of land use management and the changing policy landscape there, I think those two things working together over the next few years we might generate some of the biggest changes.
Thanks so much, Ben. And in fact, it resonates a bit with what both Karen and then Paul were talking about. So maybe, Paul, I'm going to come to you because, tackling these interconnected challenges around climate, we've got to address basically, there's a bit of an echo, climate emergency, nature loss, and inequality all together. And we know how that is challenging at international negotiations. We've been talking about how can we bring the conventions together, the UNFCCC, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. So, what all of these conventions and so many of how they're implemented need to be considered together. Now, you were talking about your, BP's quite ambitious, I would say, and innovative way and ambition of reimagining energy for people and our planet, and how you've had to address some of these challenges together. I'd be curious to know, what's been the reaction internally on any synergies or trade-offs that might exist, because the reality is it's not always a win-win-win, but then any learnings that you can share with us on some of those discussions, even though the overall ambition is pretty clear.
Well, I think there is one obvious area of intersection that is genuinely a win-win-win, literally, for people, for biodiversity, and for climate. And it's really the one that Karen spoke to. If we're talking about scale, either of climate mitigation or improvement of livelihoods or biodiversity and habitat conservation, it has to be natural climate solutions. And, the biggest challenge to the land use sector in the last 40 years, and particularly in the forest sector, has been, if you like, the inability for either direct land use regulation or subsidies to improve land use management, or bans on things. They haven't really worked. And I think at the end of the day, because there's a lack of financial incentive for the various actors to do the right thing. And so for us, where the win-win-win comes together is to introduce carbon pricing and then to allow NCS to be used in compliance regimes to discharge some proportion of compliance because NCS is necessary for Paris. It has these co-benefits. It does bring in finance on a multi-billion-dollar scale. And I think to make that work, you need to do it well. You can't approach NCS in ways that it was sometimes approached in the past, both on the quality of supply side and how the NCS credits are used. I think collectively we have to come up with a better, more credible way of doing it. And I think that to Ben's point, is where partnerships really matter. You know, we have to bring sectors together, we have to bring demand and supply together, we have to bring civil society and the private sector together to agree on, you know, something that may not be perfect, but given the amount of time we have left and the potential scale, low cost and carbon abatement potential, you know, let's get on and try and make it work. And Article 6 within the UNFCCC, working together with the CBD, is one big lever we can pull.
Super, thanks so much, Paul. That's hugely helpful. And in fact, it makes me think, you know, win-win-win. This report that came out is definitely demonstrating some win-win-win. So Akanksha, last question before then I wrap up. You know, one of the things I've kept, you know, been thinking about so much is about this language. So we're talking about, we've got to have a green recovery. But actually, if you just took the green out of that sentence, all of the stats in this report and in other reports and all of these calls are so compelling in terms of the economic case, the job opportunity. Should we even be pushing, you know, is it actually backfiring against our efforts to talk about green? Do you have any observations on that, Akanksha, very quickly before we wrap up?
So I would just second your thinking, is that is the only recovery which is on the table right now. Because if we don't go down this path, frankly, the planet and the resources that we currently extract from will no longer be there. So I think we can very comfortably drop the word green and just talk about people and planet compatible recovery.
I like it. Thanks so much. People and planet compatible. Here we go. So I'm going to thank the speakers. Thanks so much. I have one slide because Business for Nature has launched a call to action, and this in a way pulls together some of the threads that have been discussed just now. If we can get the next slide, please. Paul and others were talking about, you know, the financial incentives, and we were all talking about the need for collaboration. Ultimately, we need to give comfort and courage to policymakers to make these ambitious agreements to reverse nature loss in this decade. Never before have so many companies, so many CEOs been publicly stating how important it is to deal with climate, nature, and people together. And so all of you on the line, in your supply chains, in your networks, please, please, please encourage everyone, all of these companies, to sign a very simple 3-sentence call to action, which basically says nature is everyone's business. You'll see here that the second sentence is governments must adopt policies now to reverse nature loss in this decade. And in terms of the collaboration, it is only together. It is not a blame game of saying it's for governments to do this or for business to do this or for scientists to do this. It's all together. So please sign up by the 1st of September. This is a new date we've extended so that we can bring that to the Biodiversity Summit, the UN General Assembly, all of the future negotiations, to give that evidence that there are companies calling for this. You have some of the companies already signed up, join them, and thank you so much. I'll hand back to Peter.
Thank you, Eva, so much, and thank you to all those on the panel. It just remains for me to sum up. I think that I think perhaps the abiding message is it's not a green recovery, it's the only recovery. I think that was a great phrase from Akanksha and from you, Eva. I mean, I think what we've heard is that nature is linked to so many things. It's prosperity and employment, it's climate and food and health, even more so since COVID. We've heard about 3 systems and 15 transitions to actually make it work. And we also heard from Akanksha, on the business side, to make this work, we need to understand what is relevant, explore the partnerships and collaboration. I think we've heard a lot of that today. And then what about the enablers? And I think there are 3 key enablers that we need to look at for business to make this work. We need to have science-based targets. We need to explore the nature-based solutions we've heard a lot about today as the way forward, and make sure there's the collective business. We just heard that from Eva. So these are the 3 areas that WBCSD is working on through its Nature Action Program going forward. So expect to hear more about this going forward. Next slide. In terms of next steps, firstly, thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you particularly, Akanksha, for sharing the highlights of the report. You will get in your inbox, you'll get the slides and recording of the session. You should already have received a business summary of the WEF report. It will appear on our website shortly. You can get the full report of the WEF report on the World Economic Forum website as well. And as Eva said, don't forget the call to action and please consider signing up. If you want to know what WBCSD is doing around the COVID, there is information on our website about initiatives and actions. So on that note, I will close. Again, thank you all for joining. Wish you all a good day. This session will be repeated this afternoon for those in different time zones. Thank you for joining and good day to you all.